And so sitting nice and tall, just close the eyes. Taking a nice breath in, a nice breath out. In the same way we always begin, by coming into a place of presence, paying attention on purpose, being present to how we feel, what we're carrying with us, what impressions might be active in our experience in this moment. What thoughts or opinions might be guiding us. The state of our faith, our compassion, our love. And so as we sit and breathe for a moment, we simply come into a state of self-reflection, paying attention on purpose. Avidya asmita raga devesha abhinivesha kleshaha. There are 5 afflictions which disturb the equilibrium of consciousness, and they are ignorance, ego, a sense of I, attachment to pleasure, aversion to pain, and the fear of death. And these 5 kleshas are called the 5 poisons of the heart. And so at the beginning of every session, we close the eyes and breathe, and we come into a state of self-awareness, self-reflection, so that we can understand if those qualities are present, how they might be affecting us. And we don't have to be analytical about it and be like, well, the fear of death and dying is with me right in this moment, in this particular way. No, it's just acknowledging that in this moment, I do not feel completely healed. I feel suffering occurring in my body, in my mind, in my emotional state of being. And then, with that understanding, with that knowing that these kleshas are present within us in some way, shape, or form, then we work to actively open the heart to the power of healing, to the power of peace, to the power of love and unity, to the power of oneness. So let's take the hands together in front of the heart. And together we'll lift our voices in one Om. Take a breath in. And bowing the head toward the heart, acknowledging all that is. And draw the face back to center, release the hands. And so today's talk is going to be a bit of a collection. We'll talk about Svadyaya and what self-study is. So the word Svadyaya means to self-study. And we'll talk about the kleshas and where the kleshas fit into self-study. And then how the kleshas can be used to understand the power of healing more effectively on our spiritual path, and how the power of healing automatically includes a space to be held for the kleshas, because they're part of our human experience. Some people say, well, I'm sick and tired of feeling this way. I just don't want to feel this way anymore. But the reason why we feel a certain way is because there are certain things present in our life, certain behaviors that are present in our life, certain tendencies that we have in our life. And we're not addressing those tendencies to a place, to a point where they're being resolved. Instead, we're just either partly addressing them to whatever degree we can in any given moment, or we're not at all. And it's important that we understand that. Because if we have tendencies in our life that are harmful to ourselves, and we're not addressing those tendencies, then healing is not an option. Period. That's the basic crux of the matter, is that if you are seeking spiritual healing, then you have to do the work. You cannot experience spiritual healing if you are not engaged in the work. You don't have to be engaged in the work 24/7 with absolute awareness all the time, with a cold heart discipline. That's not what I'm saying. But you do have to have awareness. You need to be mindful. And if the tendency is to look out and blame the world, then that tendency is going to inhibit your healing. If the tendency is to look in and see lack, then that tendency is going to inhibit your healing. If the tendency is to think that you're only ever broken, then that tendency is definitely going to inhibit your healing. We need to look at our tendencies and recognize that there's a lot of validity to what we feel, but there's also a lot of misunderstanding about it. So that if we're looking out at the world and we're saying, this is everybody else's fault, it's just because the world is a horrible place and people are horrible and violent and I never get a fair shake. Fair? What is that? That's not a universal law. There's no such thing as fair. There's only being alive or not being alive. And if you're alive, odds are you're going to come across some pretty challenging situations that don't appear to be fair. But you know what they are? They are fodder for your growth and for your healing if you allow them to be. If we go around feeling guilty all the time about every single little thing we do, then that's going to inhibit our healing greatly. So we can look at the guilt and we can say, why is guilt so present within me? What is it that I'm not accepting about myself that's causing me to feel guilt? Or what am I buying into? What story am I buying into that's causing me to feel guilt all the time about everything that I do? And looking at why guilt is present allows us to then address that from a root cause. It allows us to address the story we're buying into, the history that we've experienced, what we've carried forward from that history and from that story. And it empowers us to start to change the story, to bring the story to a place that is more accurate, that is more in line with the life that we want to live. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, self-study is about looking within, being introspective, looking within ourselves and recognizing the power that these kleshas have over us, these 5 poisons of the heart. And then making disciplined resolve, having willpower to change them, to bring them closer to healing as best we can. That's not about perfection. So many times, students of yoga will say things, and not just here, but in any school of yoga. Students get frustrated and they say, I just feel like my teacher wants too much from me. They expect me to be perfect. They expect this, they expect that. That's not accurate. That's another story. What any teacher wants for their student is for the student to become self-reflective and to realize where the work needs to be done and then to engage in that work. That's all any teacher wants. Any teacher that is of that mindset. There are, of course, teachers who want more than that. There are teachers who want you to push yourself to perfection, who want you to fit a certain frame for them. Those teachers have a place, they have a dharma, and they have a karma. And they have karma that they're working out with students. And your job and my job and their job and their students' job is to recognize the role that they play, the role that you play, the role that I play in each other's lives, so that we are not harmful to one another, so that we can be of great service to one another and not allow the ego to be the one guiding. That would be Ashmita, the story of me, and me some more. Ashmita, the story of me. It's often called meanness. Yeah. Add one more N and you've got meanness, So typically when we are saturated with ideas about what we deserve and what we should have and what we shouldn't have, we become mean-spirited, either to ourselves or to other people. So that Klesha of Ashmita really has a lot of power to it, right? It has a lot of power. It's like, this is my story, I'm sticking with it. Don't you tread on my story. You tread on my story and I'm going to get mean, which begins with me. So at any rate, so we have these 5 kleshas, and we have this beautiful practice of Svadyaya. And these two are sometimes talked about in unison, but not often. Because Svadyaya is typically looked at as study of the self to the backdrop of Scripture. Who are you? Who are you really, according to the Scripture that you follow, according to the Bhagavad Gita, according to the Bible, according to the Quran? Who are you? And where do you fit in the greater scheme of this spiritual realm of knowing, of being? Who are you? And when we talk about Svadyaya, I will typically bring up the kleshas because they're what stop us from knowing ourselves. If we are caught up in the story of me, that would be the egoic me, then there's not a whole lot of space to find out who we really are outside of the egoic. There's not a lot of space for inquiry. So we work to bring the ego down to a softer place, a place that leaves a little bit more openness within for the self-inquiry. If we have the practice of avoidance, devesha, avoiding, that practice of avoiding is harmful to us because it doesn't provide us with opportunity to grow from experience. Instead, we try to stay artificially contained in a little safe space. And it's fine, we should all have a safe space. But that is not the only space you will ever inhabit. You will have to, in this life, inhabit many spaces, some of which will not be safe. So it's good to have a sanctuary that you can go back to. But that sanctuary should not be an escape. The moment it becomes an escape, it's no longer a sanctuary. Because a sanctuary is a sacred space. It is a space where you go to do even more of your work. It's not a space that we retreat to in order to get away from something else. Does that make sense? Yeah. So our sanctuary is a sacred space. It is a place where there is a certain time and a certain essence that we're going to sit with, a certain purpose within ourselves that we're going to spend time getting to know, cultivating. And then there's the love, if we're always avoiding, where is the space for the love? Where is space for love? Where is space for charity? Where is space for compassion? Where is space for wisdom? If we're constantly avoiding. So this devesha, this avoidance, this is such an important thing to understand when we're looking at ourselves, when we're working to understand who we really are. We also need to understand who we're not. And we are not our avoidances. Those are behaviors that are conducted because the ego is not balanced. We avoid controversy. We avoid confrontation. We avoid uncomfortable situations. We avoid going too far out of our comfort zone. We avoid sometimes standing up for what we believe in. We avoid telling the truth about ourselves. We avoid that greatly. We will not tell the truth about ourselves, but we'll tell the story. And as we're telling the story, some part of ourself knows it's not the truth. It's not the complete truth. Might have a little bit of truth to it. Maybe it's what your experience is in this moment, but it's not the truth of who you are. The truth of who you are so surpasses any single experience. It just does, So we look at these 5 kleshas and we say, within the realm of Svadyaya, that in order to understand myself, in order to self-study, I must understand the activity that these 5 essences, these 5 qualities, these tendencies play in my life, and then work accordingly to alleviate any burden that they cause. Abhinivesha, the fear of death. Fear of death. Some people say that abhinivesha is the primary klesha. It is the one. And if you can address that one, then you will address all of them. Because all the others are somehow or another situated around this fear of death. Fear of physical death. Fear of the death of who we think we are. Fear of the death of relationship. Fear of the death of situation. Fear of the unknown. And that all these other ones, these story of me, this, avoidance, this grasping, excuse me, ignorance, is all somehow related back to the fear of death and dying. And so if we can work to overcome the fear of death and dying, then we can overcome all of the kleshas and come into a very deep self-study that will open up for us the truth of who we really are. But if I asked any of you right now, and if I asked myself too, what's the number one thing that you're afraid of on your spiritual path? Anybody want to say? What's the number one thing you are afraid of on your spiritual path? Alicia?
Myself.
Yourself. Michelle?
Failure.
Failure.
Loss.
Anybody else?
Not knowing.
Okay.
Loss of relationships.
Loss of relationships. And failure. Yeah. They're all forms of death. They're all forms of death. What's the worst thing that can happen if your spiritual path is a success? What's the worst possible thing that can happen? Right? Like no one has an answer, right? So if your spiritual path is a success, not that we want to look at things in terms of success and failure, but let's just say we are. So if your spiritual path is a success, of course things are going to change because things are always changing. But what's the worst? There is no worst thing that can possibly happen. If you undergo this spiritual transformation that you have decided to move through, the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to recognize yourself. And you're going to experience inner joy and peace. I don't know. There's nothing so bad there, right? What's the worst thing that can happen if you put down your spiritual path in favor of your ego?
All the same things.
Failure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Suffering.
What was that?
I would say suffering.
Suffering. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that you don't suffer on the spiritual path, you do, but it's different somehow. It's not something that we overly invest in, I guess. When we're not awakening to our own spirituality, we're buying into something. And the something that we tend to be buying into is the suffering, is the story. That's what we tend to buy into. And that's how we will begin to see ourselves and how we'll begin to see all others, is through that story. But when we're walking along our spiritual path and we're actively engaged in the work of our spirituality, suffering comes to us because it comes to everybody without exception. And when it comes to us, instead of saying no, we say yes. Instead of saying, why me? We say, why not me? Instead of saying, but you're an inconvenience in my life right now, and I don't want you to be here, we say, you will be an amazing teacher. What lessons are you carrying for me this time? And we don't see it as a hindrance to our learning. We see suffering as inspiring our learning, because we get to learn yet again the power of healing. And the more that we have that kind of a relationship with suffering, the less power suffering has over us. The more that our relationship reflects acceptance and compassion and a willingness to learn, a willingness to step up anyway, then the less that suffering has power over our hearts and our being. The less that suffering derails us. The shorter it lasts, the more quickly it's resolved. Because we recognize it for what it is, which is a transitory state of experience. Suffering is a transitory state of experience. It is not a permanent fixture in your life. You will not suffer every moment of every day forever. Some moments you'll suffer. Other moments you'll laugh. Other moments you'll cry. Other moments you'll be somewhere in between the two. It's always fluctuating. If you knew that there was a stock market option that you could buy into the stocks, and you knew that this particular stock was like, is that the stock you would buy into? No, not if you were a good stock person. No. You're looking for the stock that's doing this, or at least going up a little bit and then leveling and then going up. You don't want the ones that have the harsh downs, right? Because you lose your money. So why do we invest in suffering then? Because suffering is transient, just like that stock is transient. It's sharp and then it's gone. It's sharp and then it's gone. It's sharp and then it's gone. And we invest so much energy into it. We repeat the story 10,000 times instead of just receiving the lesson from the story, from the experience rather, and moving forward from there, being grateful for whatever we learned. But did you ever notice that when a situation happens in your life that has caused you some suffering, that you tell one person, and that first time that you tell it it might be pretty accurate and on par, and then you tell it to the next person, and there's a couple of additional details, and then you tell it to another person, and there's a couple of additional details, and then by the time you tell it to the 10,000th person, it's a completely different story. And it's nowhere near accurate. Gossip is like this, right? This is ignorance, not being with things the way they are. Recognizing exactly what is happening, working with it directly without elaborating or exaggerating, knowing what you need in order to bring yourself to, a place of healing. And if you don't know what that is, then taking the steps to find out. And then when you're in that place of doing that heavy work, that heavy lifting, of inviting the healing in and allowing it to overwhelm the suffering with love, to overwrite the suffering with compassion, you're in the midst of your spiritual work. And you're changing your life forever. But it's not just one change. It's 10,000 changes. Every day. Every minute. But those changes are going to happen anyway. Whether you engage in the success of your spiritual path or the randomness of your ego. All those changes are going to be there either way. Why are we not afraid of losing relationships if we continue with the behaviors that we have now? Why are we only afraid of losing those relationships if we change ourselves for the better? Does that make sense? Right? Like, I think every single person in this room, all of us, can identify something about ourselves that is driving people away. We're not worried about that, though. You know? Why are we not worried about that? If that's our excuse for why we won't go deep into our spirituality, that doesn't make sense. You would think that if that was a genuine concern of ours, that we would apply it across the board. And whatever behavior we were taking part in that was driving people away from us, we would stop that behavior. But no, we don't. We just say, well, in this area over here, well, you know, because everybody suffers kind of like the norm, you know. So these behaviors that we have that push people away, we may see them as a bit of a norm. Whereas if we awaken to the inherent goodness that exists within us, that's not a norm. That's something that's a bit different. And so there's a lot of fear there associated with that. And so we take the excuse of driving people away or ending relationships or whatever type of death we're talking about. We take that excuse and we use that as a reason to stay off or to tread very lightly on our path of spirituality. If we take it apart, it's not a valid argument. Does that make sense? Not a valid argument. Your relationships are going to change anyway. Are you still friends with the people you went to high school with? How many of you? Every single person you went to high school with? No. All those hands went right back down. 1, 2 people you went to high school with. Yeah, right? Because all those relationships changed. Yeah. Sometimes marriage relationships change. You know, sometimes adult friendships change. It just happens. So don't grasp or avoid based on relationship. Let the relationship change. That's actually for everybody's betterment. Because you're playing out a very complicated karma with each other. And if you try to hold fast onto somebody, you're trying to inhibit resolution of whatever needs to be resolved in that relationship. The coming together and the going away of people is meant to be. It's what it is. It gives us an opportunity to receive people and to let them go peacefully. I have a very good friend, her name is Dipti, and she says that it's like being on a train. She says, you know, you get on the train when it's your time to get on the train. And you'll be on the train for however many stops it is until you're supposed to get off. And there's a series of stops in between. And other people get on the train. And you have no control over that. You have no control over who bought a ticket, who didn't buy a ticket, who can come on the train, who can't come on the train. It's not up to you. All you can do is sit in the seat and say, please don't sit next to me. Or please do sit next to me. And but even if the person does sit next to you or doesn't sit next to you, you also have absolutely no control over when they get off the train. That's not up to you. All you can do is sit and hold space for them while they're there. That's it. Maybe put your pocketbook on the seat next to you. Try not to. But yeah, so the self-study is more than just saying, I'm watching myself breathe. We start at class all the time. Every single class begins with watching yourself breathe, because the breath is one of the easiest ways of looking at the self non-judgmentally. But even that's not easy, because so many people look at the way they breathe and go, why do I breathe like this? I breathe too shallow, I breathe too deep, I breathe too fast, I breathe too loud, I breathe too quiet. My breath is interrupted, I have to sneeze, I have to sniffle. You know, I mean, something is as present to us as the breath, and it's hard to be kind to that. But it's a good starting place. It's a good starting place, because if we can learn how to pay attention to the arrival and departure of the breath and not have so much attachment to it, then maybe we can also pay attention to the arrival and departure of people, of experiences, of all different things in life, and not have so much attachment to it. When people leave, instead of saying, "Why are you leaving me?" say, "I wish you well on your journey, and I look forward to hearing all about it." And when people arrive, instead of saying, "Oh my God, why are you here?" say, "I'm so glad you came to teach me something. What are we going to learn today?" And when people stay too long, there's this great story about everybody know who the Red Hats are? Mm-hmm. So the Red Hats are a group of women who wear red hats. And they go places together. They go to the theater and stuff like that. And typically their hats are very red and very large. And there's a story that says that there were a group of red hats who went to the theater, live theater, and this person bought a ticket and was sitting behind them. And the hats were obstructing the view of the stage. So the person's going like this. And then the one in front would do it. And she'd go like that, and then she'd go like this. She's going back and forth and getting all aggravated, getting all angry. And she's just sitting there fuming in her anger that this person has the nerve to have a red hat on. How could they do that? They wear a red hat in the theater. Don't they know they're in the theater? They take their hat off if they're inside. Doesn't matter if they're women, Men have to take their hats off inside. Shouldn't women have to too? Isn't that equal rights? Yeah. All different stories go through the mind, But out of ignorance, what the person didn't realize was that they had options. They could have said, "Excuse me, I can't see the stage. Could you take your hat off, please?" And if that didn't work, they could have moved their seat. They could have left and asked for a refund of their ticket for another show. They could have done so many things, but instead they stayed there, fuming, in the bitterness of their own anger, in the state of ignorance. To learn about the self is to take the chance, to have the conversation, to make the inquiry, to be present to what is, to stop judging critically and harshly and violently that which doesn't need to be judged. So your breath is interrupted today. Maybe you have allergies. The pollen is falling down from some of the trees. Maybe you didn't sleep well last night. Maybe what the breath needs is for you to tend to it rather than give it another reason to be constricted. We don't need another reason to be constricted. And in my own path, I'm seeing this firsthand right now and have been for a while. I was the caregiver for my beloved husband for 5 years after his diagnosis. And in those 5 years, I was very focused with his care, with everything that he needed, chemo sessions, the whole 9 yards, everything. I never missed a chemo session I missed one chemo session with him. One. Out of 5 years. Staying up late, tending to what he needed, taking care of everything else in life that had to be taken care of. And I was pretty good at balancing everything that had to be balanced. And then he passed away. And when he passed away, life changed. It changed a lot. And in the weeks that followed, I don't know that I changed. I was still looking for what I was supposed to be doing. I still was talking to him and he wasn't there. Did you take your, oh, okay, you're not there. What do you need? No, you're not there. Then a day came that I realized that he was gone. Really realized it. I don't even know how to explain that. But if anybody here has lost somebody, you know what I mean. There comes a day when you realize that you don't have to do that anymore. And all the muscles in my body tensed. And my low back, which I've historically had some challenges with, became chronically challenged to the point where it was so tight and painful that sometimes I couldn't stand up right away. And it's been a process. You know, they say that when you lose someone close to you, that something typically will happen and you'll end up getting sick. Like, on some level. Maybe you get the flu, maybe you have physical pain, emotional pain, whatever it is, you may end up getting sick. And sometimes they say spouses die very close to one another because they were so attached to each other, and one is gone and then the other one will leave too. My husband made me promise not to do that, so I'm not planning on going anywhere. But I was expecting to get sick. I was expecting that my immune system would crash, which it did, and the Lyme's disease kicked in again, as it always does when I'm in that place. And when it happened, instead of like freaking out about it and being like, I don't want this can't happen again, it's not supposed to happen, I practice yoga. You know, it's like, that's bullshit. Instead, I just sought answers. And I said, what can I do? Like, you're here. I know you're here. You know, the Lyme is there, and the pain is there, and the constriction is there. So what can I do? How can I learn to take care of myself now in this new way, where I have to learn how to put myself first to a degree, you know? And so I've been working at that. And I've been working at the unfolding of the tightness, you know? And by working at the unfolding of the tightness, I'm also working at the unfolding of who I understand myself to be. And where I understand myself to be. And how I understand life to be. Because pain is a reaction to life. Pain is a reaction to life. And your relationship with that pain depends upon your relationship with life. So don't be afraid of your pain. Welcome it, because it can be a teacher, a good teacher. It can teach you how to care for yourself, how to nurture yourself, really. Not spoil yourself, but nurture yourself. It can teach you how to accept yourself, how to love yourself. Don't take your pain and push it off to the side and be like, screw you. You know? You wouldn't do that to a child. Would you? Push it off to the side and say, stop your whining. No. Well,
there are some people that do.
Yeah. But nobody here. So instead, you pull the pain close to you and you say, let's heal together. Let's work together to heal together. Let's be together to heal together. You're here anyway, you know? So let's have it be useful, purposeful, and let's let it build us up on our path so that there can be a great healing. That requires self-study. It requires that you look at the kleshas and that you look at all the other tendencies that are present and that you have a willingness to work with them in order to resolve them to whatever degree they can be resolved in this life. And that leads us to, like, non-attachment. Because yes, we can do the work. And, I can do the work to deconstrict my lower back. But the reality is my lower back is never going to deconstrict completely because my low back is damaged. My bones are fusing together. I have a lot of issues going on there health-wise. So I know that it's never going to have complete freedom physically. But you know what I can have is complete freedom mentally. To hold a space for those changes that happen to everybody in life. And hold that space and let it be a good teacher to me about how to have compassion for myself. Because if I don't have compassion for myself, how do I have compassion for others? If we don't have self-compassion, we will only ever listen with half an ear. And I pray that I have never listened to any of you with only half an ear, that I've always given you my complete ear. Because that would be the only thing that I would ever intend to do. Does that make sense? So what are your thoughts, questions, ideas, impressions, answers?
I like the fact that you were talking about pain and physical and how to treat pain. I, in the past month, had an accident where I burnt myself. And in my pain, I said, okay, I do yoga now. I should be able to breathe through this incredible pain. I should be able to focus. Let me just breathe. Come on. And I couldn't do it. I was so upset with myself. But then I was like, okay, it was a good try.
Yeah.
And, when you have physical things, you have to take care of them. And yeah, they're going to teach you. But yeah, you think, okay, I've got yoga now. As if it's the superpower. It's going to make it all go away.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite work that way.
Yeah. Not at all. Actually, it does support and it does help. But it says in a couple of the scriptures and in a great article that I read this morning, it says that that it takes 12 years of a regular practice to build the resiliency in your nervous system to be able to deal with the experience of awakening. Yeah, it takes 12 years of consistent practice. Yeah.
Over a long period of time.
With little to no interruption and great enthusiasm. Exactly. Totally. Patanjali, right? Yeah. What was that, Deanna?
I was going to say that Kim, you were compassionate with yourself.
Yeah.
Which was good. She was like,
Absolutely.
give it a try.
Yeah, completely.
I didn't beat on myself for causing my own illness. It was like, oh well, it happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Recognizing that you fell into the old habit of should, and where, just we do fall into that.
Yeah.
After we've been told our whole lives that, and just recognizing that and saying, oh, no, should.
Yeah.
And then just accepting your relationship with it. That's what the yoga brings.
Yeah, and that is what the yoga brings. The yoga brings acceptance. This has happened. I'm crying. This has happened. It hurts. This has happened. It needs attention. And then doing what obviously needs to be done. Absolutely. Deanna, what did you want to say?
I wanted to make a joke and say 12 years and many lifetimes.
Yeah.
I would like to reflect as you were speaking that I felt within myself for my personal journey is to allow more permission for things to change. Every time people come in your life, they come in your life because they're going to come out of your life as well. And then if I allow that permission more so, then other people will allow themselves permission for me to continue on. So if we're swooping in and out and crossing, if you hold that, it could reflect. But I was just seeing the energy of permission just to allow change to happen because it's not like we're trying to stop the season.
Exactly. And that permission should be out loud. Because sometimes we give ourselves permission mentally, and that's not quite powerful enough sometimes. So if you do have a habit of giving yourself permission, but you do it silently, and you still find that you're struggling, try saying it out loud. I give myself permission to move through. I give myself permission to release. I give myself permission to be. I give myself permission to feel. Yeah, because saying it out loud is different. Yeah, a little bit different, a little bit more affecting. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts or ideas? Yeah. So this This path that we're on, this spiritual path, I think a lot of times in the world today, what tends to happen is we expect it to be easier than it is. We expect it to kind of be like a red carpet where, ta-da, I have decided I'm going to now be on a spiritual path. And then, and there's flowers lining the carpet, you know.
It's a short carpet.
And it's a really super short carpet. Yeah, it's so short. It's like 2 steps, period, you know. Little did we know that it's 12 lifetimes long. And that, you know, the roses that are lining it are doused with thorns. And part of that path is probably hot coals, you know.
Up and down.
Yeah, tumultuous terrain for sure. And the fact that we've stepped onto a spiritual path, all that means is that we're willing to see the terrain for what it is and not judge it, hate it, try to get rid of it. Instead, we're going to accept our oneness with it. I'm always so inspired when I see people do rock climbing, like real rock climbing, like cliff climbing. I'm like, ooh, I have a fear of heights. Like, ooh. A 10-foot ladder doesn't serve me well, never mind a 1,500-foot cliff. And when we were in Costa Rica, we did the zip line. And we did the zip line, and we did the zip line at the tallest zip line. So there's 13 zip lines, and you start at the top of this mountain. What was it? I guess so. I don't know. I have a T-shirt somewhere. I survived. Yeah. Well, you know, you drive all the way to the top of the mountain, and you get to look at all the beautiful little dart frogs, you know, and not touch any of them. And then they hook you onto the first zip line. And the first zip line goes across a ravine. Do you remember how tall that ravine is?
You could see both the coast, the Caribbean and the Pacific.
Yeah. That's how tall it is. That you can see both coasts. Yeah. So I'm hooked on. And Ed is with me, you know, and he's standing, he's next after me. And he's like, do you want me to go first? Are you sure you don't want me to go first? I don't know. I don't know if I can go with you. Because he knew, you know, that I have this thing about heights. And I'm like, no, I have to just do this. So I go to the edge, and I look up, and I jump. And I go. And I get halfway. And it stopped. And I'm still looking up. And I'm like, don't look down, Sudha. And I looked down, and I went, oh, shoot. Look up. And then all these things started playing in my mind about death and dying. Yeah, you know. And I thought to myself, and I could just hear Ed yelling from the platform, and he's like, are you okay? What? Is she supposed to stop? You know? And I'm like, okay, so the guy went over the emergency, you know, like if your unit stops, what to do. So I spin myself around, and I put my hands up on, and I start hauling myself across. And I can hear Ed, and I'm saying to myself, dear God, please don't let him come out here, because that's just going to be a disaster. We're both going to fall 2,500 feet to our death, you know. And so, but the guy, the guide, he jumps on. He comes out there, and he goes, just stop. He goes, just look at me and just stop and don't move. And I'm like, shit. So I do. He goes, hold on to the wire. He hooks his carabiner to my unit, and he takes my pulley, and it wasn't attached properly. It was like you've got the pulley, and you've got the metal part, and you've got where the metal parts meet, and the cord was right there.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So he fixed it. And I said, are you sure?
Oh my God, like, take me back to the
And he was like, do you want me to go the rest of the way with you? And I said, no, I think you better go and check on my husband. I'm fine. And I was okay, you know, like it all turned out for the better. So I get to the next platform, and Ed comes across, no problem whatsoever. And he lands on the platform and he goes, "Do we need to go?" And the other guide who was waiting there for us, he heard and he said, "There's only 2 ways to go." Now, mind you, this platform is in this big old tree, which is like, I don't even know how many thousands of, it's huge. He goes, "You either climb down or you zip line down." And I just looked at Ed and I said, "We're zip lining. Don't worry about it." So, but just being in that place where you're confronting your fear. And I still don't do well with 10-foot ladders, but I guess I'm okay with ziplining, But on your spiritual path, that's where you are. On your spiritual path, you are in the place where you are constantly confronting your fear, and you're doing it. And you're paying attention to it on purpose. And you're just praying to God that your little pulley is attached properly. And if it's not, you sing Hare Krishna all the way down. Yeah. So any other thoughts for today? Anything else anybody wants to share? Yes, Cal?
Yeah, I was listening to something from Wayne Dyer the other month, and he gave this story about this one yogi in India. I'm not sure when it was. That he was a very, I guess you wouldn't say high ranking, but very
Awakened.
Wise. What's that?
Awakened.
Yes, thank you. And so there was a chance to go and see this person, this man, and this one lady goes, and I guess Wayne Dyer asked her, how to go, and apparently this gentleman had different physical ailments that the doctors were totally astounded, because they said the average person could not function with this amount of pain this person was in. But yet he was sitting there and he was basically holding his own. And basically, I guess the lady asked him, "How are you doing this?" And basically he said that I am not the body, and basically his lesson for others was to basically separate yourself from the body. So when you're talking of that caliber, do you just reach a point where you just basically separate yourself from your physical body, and that basically allows you to, deal with that?
We have to be mindful when we say separate from the body. The answer to that is yes, but the answer to that is also no.
Right. Because
separating from the body is something that can become a psychological issue.
Yes.
But when you're talking about somebody, and I think you're talking about Ramdev, when you're talking about somebody like Ramdev, or any of the masters in India or elsewhere, the answer is yes, because they have entered into such a relationship with pain, and into such a relationship with life, and in such a relationship with healing, that they have actually transcended the experience of it. And it's all because of a love for God. So it's not just that this person sat there and did this pranayama practice or this meditation practice and they acquired superpowers. The foundation of that practice is unity. The foundation of that practice is reunion with the divinity. And when you are looking at you have 2 apples. One apple has maggots. One apple is beautifully healthy and red. Which one will you eat? Obviously, you'll eat the red apple without the maggots. Yet we choose life over love.
Which one is organic?
Good point. They're both organic. Okay. And yet, symbolically speaking, life can often be kind of like the maggot-ridden apple, where there's just so much that's going on, and that's what we're choosing to eat. When we have this potential within ourselves, within this life, within our community, to open up to a higher power, to open up to a consciousness, to open up to love, we should be biting the red apple and finding out what the difference between the two are, and then making an informed decision for ourselves. And that's all they've done. They've made an informed decision. They have made a choice. And their choice has been to awaken. And so they exist in their awakened state, in a place of consciousness, in a place of compassion, in a place of love, and no longer in a place of fear or in a place of hatred or any of these other things that we tend to go through as humans. So yes, they have left the body, but they also haven't, because they're still here.
Right.
Their relationship is different. And we all come into that resolution at some point. Certain resolutions, I should say. We all come into small resolutions along the way. You have an anger for somebody for years, and suddenly that anger melts away. You have disappointment in your parents for years, and suddenly that disappointment gives way. You have a sense of dissatisfaction with yourself, and then one day that dissatisfaction is softer or not even there anymore. These are all little awakenings. Awakenings only happen toward compassion. Awakening doesn't happen in the other direction. That's going to sleep again. So if we're experiencing something that is causing us to hate ourselves, to hate others, to feel separated, to feel overwhelmed, that's not really awakening. Awakening is compassion. Awakening is peace. Awakening is joy. Awakening is unity. Those things, they may be early stages of awakening that are not well prepared for. And we talk about that quite a bit, that's why you have a practice, is to prepare yourself for awakening, so that your awakening is smooth, easier, and producing what it's meant to, which is a sense of unity and resolution. Yeah, it's a great question. So many people say that in an early stage of awakening that there's a lot of suffering there. And what ends up happening is that one is still so identified with the physical body, then the nervous system is shooting off all of these messages because it's not toned enough to deal with what's happening within the body. And I just love this article, explained it so beautifully. And the Hatha Yoga Pradipika explains it quite similarly, that the molecules of your being are actually breaking themselves down and building themselves back up again. They're actually healing themselves through the process of breakdown and buildup. And if your nervous system is not in a place to deal with that, then your nervous system is not in a place to deal with that. That's like, scrape the top layer of skin off and let it grow back again. That hurts, right? And you're talking your whole being. Yeah. So yeah, they do leave the body, but they also don't leave the body. They just understand. They just understand.
Yeah, because I know leaving the body in an unhealthy way is a form of dissociation.
Dissociation. Yeah, and they don't dissociate.
No.
Yeah. Although maybe some of them do. We can't speak universally about any group of people. I'm sure some of them do dissociate. But they would be the ones that are in progress, in process, in still learning. The ones that are considered to be modern day saints, Amma, Ramdev, Swami Shivananda when he was here. Swami Shivananda I was so taken by, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dayananda because I'm moving into his time now. I was so taken recently. My husband and I are devotees of Swami Shivananda. Swami Adhyatmananda is my guru, but Swami Shivananda was his guru, and therefore I'm devoted to Swami Shivananda. And right after Ed passed, I came across a video of Swami Shivananda's death. And I was shocked that there's a video out there of the moment that Swami Shivananda died. And before he died, he was in the car, being driven from one location to the next. He got out of the car, he walked into this, I think it was a puja or homa, something was happening for him. And he sat in a chair, and he took part in the puja, and he closed his eyes. And that was it. Now ask yourself, what condition does your nervous system need to be in order to do that? That's how much you need to practice. That's how much you need to practice.
That's a really good reason.
What was that?
That's a really good reason
Yeah.
to practice.
Because in the yoga, the understanding is that the quality of the death equates to the quality of the rebirth. So if you wish to have less suffering in this life, or the next one, then die a good death in this one. And to die a good death means to know you're united, reunited with your source. Yeah.
So as somebody moves down their spiritual journey and their awakening, if you want to call it, continues moving forward, not referring to the tension in your shoulders or pains here and there, that the person's human body, the cells, the molecules do change.
In awakening,
I'm
they
asking
say
a
they
question.
do.
Yeah.
In awakening, they say they rebuild themselves. There's a whole kind of a science to it, but it has to do with the radiant energy called tejas that's within the molecules of the being, within the atoms of the being. And that being activated and cleansing the body of all impurities.
And that would probably make sense in why when you meet somebody that just seems to just have that inner, you just feel it.
Yeah.
That's probably kind of where that's coming from.
Yeah.
Maybe something.
Because something is in process, absolutely. And, when we're in our yoga practice and we're suffering through our practice, because we all suffer through our practice to some degree. Not everybody can fold forward and touch their forehead to the ground. I mean, my goodness, most of us can't. That's process. That is the process. It's not about when can I get my forehead to the ground? When will my face touch my knee? That's at some end point. That may not ever even happen. The idea within the yoga practice is to make peace with what is. So when you feel relief in your body as a result of your practice, I'm sometimes often amazed at how easy it is to receive relief, This morning when I woke up, my back was so tense. I had to take a few breaths before I sat up. And I have one of the wheels, the yoga wheels, in my room. And so I went into a back bend on the yoga wheel, just a simple bridge posture, and I stayed there for 10 breaths. And I got up and I was like, wow, that's a huge difference. Huge difference. The relief that was felt between the pain and the relief of the pain, or the resolution of the pain, that relief is an indication of happiness. That relief allows us to move closer to compassion. The relief that we feel from any amount of suffering that we experience moves us closer to compassion. Compassion for self, compassion for others. So seek out the ways to heal yourself. Don't be afraid to try different things. Try everything to heal. And allow your body to become vibrant. It doesn't mean it's going to stop aging. It doesn't mean you'll never have another ache or pain in your body. Oh, you will. You just have a different relationship with it to some degree, whatever that means for you. Yeah. Be the healing. All right, one last time, and then it's Dayananda's turn. Say after me, avidya, ashmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, klesha. The 5 afflictions which disturb the equilibrium of consciousness are ignorance or lack of wisdom, ego, pride of the ego or the sense of I-ness, attachment to pleasure, aversion to pain, and fear of death or clinging to life. Let's not do that, okay? Instead, we'll just all be awakened. All right, close the eyes. Place the right hand on the heart, left hand over the right. And together we'll Om. Take a nice breath in. Om. Namaste. Thank you all so much for being here today.